This sort of study started many, many years ago with what Des wants to call me the father. He's called me much worse. This really comes from the godfather of Irish local history, and that is Bill Crawford of this office. I mean, the man who for many generations encouraged many people, including me, to become interested in the Irish localities. And that he always preached the virtue of studying townland. So I, without being a historian interested really in the sort of 17th century, without much enthusiasm, for years kept a file where I put material on one townland, which is what Bill always kept on talking about. And it's a townland in North Armagh, since the theme of this series is on Armagh. It's a townland in North Armagh called Knocknamuckly. It's a real townland. It's not an invention. There you are, Knocknamuckly Road. Some of you may know where this is. It's Knocknamuckly Road in the townland of Knocknamuckly. Where is it? Well, there it is there. You're 4 miles from Portadown. You're 4 miles from Lurgan. And a mile from Blair. Now that point I think will become important as we go on and we try to understand a little bit of this townland. For those of you who think not in road signs but in maps, now you are there, there's Portadown. Right, you will see that down here, that little bend in the county boundary is the townland of Knocknamuckly. The townland follows the county boundary there. So really it is a townland right on the edge of County Armagh, very close to Tyrone, or very close to County Down. It's also, and I think some of you by now might realise this, a townland which is situated very much in the heartland of the linen trade. I mean, again, another theme that Bill Crawford was very interested in. The Ban Valley coming down here through Ban Bridge and so on, the real centre of the linen trade in the 18th and 19th century, the emergence of the big linen factories and so on. So that this is a townland, therefore, which I said close to Portadown, and I said that was important. And it's important for a number of reasons, because although it looks to be a townland on the edge of something, well away from, it's actually very close to the centre of the world. Because Portadown, as you know, in the 19th century, exploded. It became what was described in the 19th century as the Crewe of Ireland. Crewe of Ireland. That is the railway centre of Ireland. Now, the importance of that is, of course, if you can get yourself to Portadown, you can get yourself to almost anywhere in the world. Because you can get yourself to Belfast, and from Belfast you can be on a ship to Australia, to Canada, to New Zealand, to anywhere. Okay? And this matters for a number of reasons. It matters because, A, people can physically move around very easily, but it also matters if you have a farm near Portadown, it's very easy to market your goods. Okay? So therefore farms in the region of Portadown commanded a premium. Rents, as we shall see, were high in Portadown, in the townlands around Portadown. So the rent we'll see later on around here is actually quite substantial. There's a lot so at that position, close to Portadown, in the centre of the 19th century linen trade, and even going back into the 18th century linen trade, this is an area of very highly desirable land, which commands a considerable premium. Okay? We'll see what the significance of that is later on. Okay? To try and situate it, there's that little bend, okay? There, that I showed you on the bigger map. There's the townland of Knocknamuckly. It's quite a small townland, as we see. It's quite a small townland, just to try and put it into some sort of administrative context. It's in the district electoral division here of Carrabrack. So if you're looking at poor law evidence, for example, that's where you need to look. and the poor law evidence, the poor house, of course, was in Lurgan, but the poor law evidence, in fact, for this townland is also very rich, again, as we'll see. Just in our story, just to draw attention to two other townlands that will become important as we go along. One is Lavery up here, right? That's one, it's Knocknamuckly here, Lavery here, and the other is Ballygarden, which is just right adjoining to Knocknamuckly beside it. Okay, so the first thing we could say is that it's situated on the edge of Armagh, but with the proviso that in fact it's actually linked into a much, much wider world. It's situated in these administrative divisions of Carrabrack, and it's situated in a parish, the parish of Knocknamuckly. There's the parish church sitting up on the hill. The parish of Knocknamuckly in the 19th century was a new creation. In the 18th century, a great part of North Armagh was part of the parish of Seagull, and it was an enormous parish. But by the 1830s, the parish was thought to be far too big, and it was carved up into a number of smaller parishes. So the civil parish continued to be Seagull, but the ecclesiastical parish was Knocknamuckly, centred on this church here, which, as some of you may know, has had its trials and tribulations in the last couple of years. And the parish is formed in 1835 from Seagull. This is the church which is built in the 1850s. Okay? Now, what is striking about the townland of Knocknamuckly when you start to gather material is how much there is. As I said, I kept a file where I kept on finding the odd bit of thing where I put it into the file, and the file rapidly came to be so big that I realised I had the townland of Knocknamuckly, small though it was, in fact has so much information about it, so much material about it, that we have to whittle it down into something else. We have to get a smaller unit within the townland to try to be able to understand some of the patterns that we're seeing. So what I decided to do is whittle it down to a farm, one farm in the townland, and see what we could discover about this farm. It's a real farm. That's it there, right? This is the odd thing. Knocknamuckly Church is in Ballygarden townland. It's up there. This is the townland of Knocknamuckly. So this is the farm here, right on the edge of the townland, right? And it's that farm. As I say, it's a real farm. It was a farm of about 5 acres. Remember, I said that this was an area where land was very desirable, and also because there was alternative employment, that is, the linen trade. People could exist on very small bits of land. So this is a highly densely populated area with small farms, and this is one of these farms, 5 acres, which was 5 acres. If you look, the main road running through the townland is here. Okay? This is the farmhouse. It's now being extended to the front, but the original 19th century farmhouse is actually just behind that. That's part of the farm. So you're looking at that, if you like, standing facing the church. That's what the farm looks like on the right. That's the same shop. You can see the same area. You can actually see that is the 19th century farmhouse there in the middle. Those two are the extensions that have been put on, but that's the original 19th century farmhouse, which is still there in the middle. Looking across the road, that's the farm on the other side of the road. There it is again. Right? It's a long, thin farm of 5 acres. That's it there. Now, as you will see, all under grass, and probably much that way in the 19th century as well. Okay, sorry. So that's coming back. That's going back to the farmhouse again. Okay, so it's a real farm of about 5 acres within the townland of Knocknamuckly. Now, this may seem to get smaller and smaller as time goes on. So what's the point of studying one farm? Surely you wouldn't learn anything by studying one farm. Well, I'd like to argue that in fact you will learn an awful lot by studying one farm. Simply for a number of reasons. One is that one of the perpetual problems that historians have is, you know, if you're going to study something, where do you stand to look at it? Right? I mean, the old problem, give me somewhere to stand and I can move the world, Archimedes and his lever. So you need to fix yourself somewhere. You need to know what is typical and what is untypical. Okay? And a farm, I think, is a good place to start because it has a real touch, feel. It belonged to one family. We'll see about that family in a moment. It belonged to one family who we can identify fairly clearly. It's also, you may say, well, it's only one farm, it doesn't really tell us anything. In fact, it's also quite an unusual place because, you know, you have an image of what the 19th century is like. Landlords are being shot at left, right and centre in Ireland. They're being assassinated. Tenants are being evicted left, right and centre. I'm afraid in this lecture no landlord will be shot, no tenant will be evicted. Indeed, the relationship between the landlord and the tenant will hardly impinge at all on our story. So that what this does is it produces, if you like, a counterpoint to the standard narrative history of Ireland, or the standard narrative history, which people often, when they're doing a local study, simply import the national picture into the locality and say that's what it must have been like. Well, in this case, it is far from it. So the farm provides us with a limiting case, if you like. If one story is the story of landlords being shot at and tenants being evicted, this is a harmonious world where everyone manages to get on. And it does also allow us to see, to look, if you like, at the story of the 19th and the early 20th century through the eyes of this farm, through the eyes of one farm. And it's you know, when we're doing this sort of thing, it's sometimes very, you're very tempted to talk about things like economic forces, price movements, agricultural practices and so on, without realizing that in fact all these structures of society, while they matter, what is equally important is what individuals chose to do. How individuals chose to order, and individuals could make choices which shape the way in which their lives work. And capturing the story of those individuals is very, very important. Let me just actually talk about the individuals who owned the farm for a moment. I just run through very quickly through the genealogy, so you won't get completely lost when I start talking about them. The man where we're going to start, who acquires the farm in 1845, Oliver, here at the top, married to Rose. Okay, he is the first generation. Right? He has a series of sons, of whom Joseph inherits the farm. Right? Joseph, who was born in 1834, dies in 1911. And then Joseph has a large family, of whom George inherits the farm. Right? And George sells the farm finally in 1919 and moves to Belfast. So essentially, George is married to Emily. Emily comes from the townland of Laval. That's the townland I pointed out to you earlier on. What is characteristic of all these people, of Oliver, of Joseph, of Martha, his wife, who comes from Waringstown, of George, as Emily, is that they are all from what we would describe as a small farm world. I mean, they're all operating within one horizon, Emily's father, Martha's father are also farmers of 5 acres. Okay? So that we're dealing with a very clear social horizon across this world. Right? This really is a small farm world. Right? So just keep those names in mind. George Oliver, who gets the farm in the 1840s, Joseph, who inherits it, George, his son, who inherits it. We'll come back to the family tree a bit later on because the family tree starts to do odd things at various points. Okay? That's George there, and that's Emily. Right? And that's the last. That's the man who sells the farm. Right? And that's Emily. That must have been taken about 1950. Right? So you'll see what we're talking about here. Okay, let's therefore go back. There's the farm. What can we say about the farm? Let's start our story in the middle of the 19th century, roughly. Perhaps the best view that we get to start with is this is the first Ordnance Survey, 1838. Yes, the farm is here. There's the farmhouse. Okay, the farm is across here. What sort of landscape, what sort of place is this in 1838? Now we have a description of this region written by an adjoining landowner, a man called Colonel Blacker. And Colonel Blacker, some of you may know, has been one of the figures instrumental in the fighting of the Orange Order, who lived at Carrick Blacker, house now destroyed. The house is just off the edge of this map, right? Colonel Blacker writes an account of this area about 1838 as part of Shaw Mason's Parochial Survey of Ireland. What he says about this area is that it's a very improved area. That up to this point, up to the beginning of the 19th century, it had been a fairly wild and fairly lawless place. And indeed it had been. Because this is the area, of course, as you know, where the religious tensions from the late 18th century, which have been instrumental in forming the Defenders and the Orange Order, the tensions over land between Catholic and Protestant weavers had resulted in the Battle of the Diamond, and the sort of tensions which that had created had spilled into the early 18th century. And there are a number, there are a number of prosecutions in the 1830s for sectarian disturbances in this area. You will know, that, of course, that orange marches were banned in the 1820s, but yet there were frequent orange marches in this area and prosecutions as a result, breaches of the Party Processions Act and so on. So this was an area which had been fairly wild, but Blacker said it's being brought into civility. He says the land is being brought into civility. He talks about planting. And you can see that even from this map. You can see little groves of trees have been produced here, almost little orchards, windbreaks around the place. Now, when someone is trying to impose order on this landscape, they're trying to put some sort of shape on the landscape. So it is a society which is improving quite considerably. It is a society, a place of small farms. As I say, the tithe allotment lists of the 1820s do tell us that we are dealing with a relatively small area. Now, the townland of Knocknamuckly, which you will see here is 254 acres, is in fact 2 estates. Okay? We think estates as very big things, but estates can equally well be very small things. The estate which is going to interest us is the estate which is owned by Thomas Carleton. Okay? It's the estate which is roughly half the townland. It's roughly that bit there. If you draw a line straight from the middle of the townland, the right hand side of the townland is the estate of Thomas Carleton. Now the Carletons have come from Belfast. They had made their money in trade at the end of the 18th century, and they had bought land in North Armagh. They had bought bits of land in other places as well, Monaghan, as far away as Monaghan. But by the early 19th century, by the 1830s, when they have this small estate, they're living in Portadown. In other words, they're not resident on the estate. Okay? And the estate is very much left to look after itself. Their estate is 132 acres, so it's not by any stretch of the imagination a very large estate. And it's divided up into a number of tenants, into a number of tenancies rather. It's land which is very desirable and also very expensive. In 1846, when Oliver buys this farm, and not so much buys the farm, but buys the lease of the farm, he pays £60 down, key money if you like, for this lease, with a rent of £9, 2 shillings and 7 pence a year. Now it's worth remembering that £9, 2 shillings and 7 pence is what he pays. Griffith's valuation, the first valuation, which is made in the 1830s, valued the farm at £5, 17 shillings. The 1860 Griffith values it at £7. So however you look at it, he's paying considerably over the odds in terms of rent for what the farm is worth, and also as a lump sum to get into it. Now, why is he doing that? Why does Oliver want to get into this? Now, part of the trick, part of the reason, I think, why he wants in is contained in the Ordnance Survey Memoirs. The Ordnance Survey Memoirs, which you all know, written in the 1830s, talks about Knocknamuckly as the property of Mr. Thomas Carleton. The former lives at Portadown, and it is let from 25 shillings to 28 shillings per acre in farms, from 3 acres to 15 acres, so we're right in the middle of the range here, in leases of 3 lives and 41 years. Okay? Now, 3 lives and 41 years is a long period of time. And we don't know whether these leases are 3 lives renewable forever. There are leases for the townland. Unfortunately, they're in a box which is unlisted, so we can't see it. But there are leases for the townland, and it may well be that these leases are not simply just leases for lives, but leases for 3 lives renewable. In which case, the point that what you're paying for in a very significant premium on your rent, not just access to Portadown, that point is important, access to a growing market, but you are also paying for security of tenure, for having this very long lease. And indeed, Oliver will have that lease from 1846 until, right the way through until 1897, when he will buy out the land on land purchase. And when they buy out the land on land purchase, the man who then owns the other side of the lease, when the inspectors come for the sale, he makes a point to the inspectors from the Land Commission, laying out the land, that landlord-tenant relations are very good here. Part of the reason why they were so good was simply that there was stability. Okay? So this is what the land looked like. This is what the farm looked like by 1847, in roughly the early 1840s. Now, in the early 1840s, of course, it wasn't a very propitious time to be taking on this sort of lease. It's right at the very beginning of the famine. We know that the famine did not hit North Armagh very hard in terms of actual starvation. It did hit Armagh very hard indeed, North Armagh in particular, through disease, through typhus. And if you read the Poor Law records, because the Lurgan Poor Law material is extremely good, we know that typhus did indeed break out in the townland of Carrabrack on the adjoining farm. But as far as we know, it never spread, it never spread onto our farm, and Oliver and his son Joseph managed to survive. So more by luck than anything else, they weathered the famine. So they come out at the other end with this lease, for which they have paid £65 and are paying over the odds for rent. Now you may ask yourself, where did he get the money? Where did he get this £65? What did Oliver do? Now we don't know much about Oliver before he moves into the farm. He's described on his son's marriage certificate as a weaver. Okay? So the weaving culture, the weaving world is still very much alive and well here. And will continue to be alive and well, as Bill Crawford showed, right up into the early 20th century. That for all the rise of factories, handloom weaving at home is still very significant. And one of Oliver's granddaughters will be trained as a weaver at home and appears as such in the 1901 census. So weaving is still very much an activity. So Oliver is a weaver. Where does a weaver get £65 to put it down for a farm? Well, the answer seems to be that the landlord lent it to him. Now that might seem curious, because why does a landlord give a tenant money to give back to the landlord to acquire land? And that seems now, why do I think that the landlord lent it to him? Because in the rentals, the landlord frequently made loans to their tenants. 10 shillings for a goat to one of the tenants' friars, money for cows, money for pigs. In other words, the landlord is acting as a banker. He always gets repaid. Without fail, he gets repaid. But he's acting essentially as a banker. He is the man who has access to capital, which he's then lending to his tenants to ensure the tenants are being able to run their farms, to pay their rent. So therefore, the landlord chooses his tenants carefully. And he obviously chose Oliver carefully. How he got to know him, we don't know. But clearly he selected Oliver carefully as someone who was suitable for a tenant who would work on the estate, who would develop his property, and he was prepared to lend him the money up front so Oliver could repay it back again. Now, why? Oliver then borrowed money from the landlord, set himself up, established himself with his lease. By the 1860s, this is the second ordnance survey. You can see the farm is still there. There it is there. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4 fields, 5 fields, 5 very large fields, roughly an acre each. You wouldn't see a field of an acre around there now. Which largely seem to have been devoted to grass. Okay, and just for the sake of completeness, that's what it looks like. You see Blacker's Mill there, Blacker's Little Mill. That's what it looks like in the final ordnance survey in 1903. There's the farmhouse, and the thing is barely changed from the early period. So there's great stability in this late 19th century period. Okay, how did people in Knocknamuckly, we have this story of a farm, Oliver the weaver getting his farm taken for him. Was this typical of people in Knocknamuckly? Now, what we do have is we have church farm registers, as we do have for most places, for the late 19th century, from 1855 on, so we can extract from it occupations. Right? And you can see, first thing, very obviously, the top half, if you go through, what dominates the dominant occupation, even though when you look at the map it looks like farming, the dominant occupation is in fact weaving. Weaving is really what is the bread and butter business of this townland, even though it looks like that's true. You'll see 58 weavers in the late 1850s, 43 in the 1860s, and then that's a very small, that's only 1 year at the end, so don't worry about that fall off. Farmers come next, carpenter, and then you get the sort of tradesmen, very few of those. Okay? So you're talking about a world which is essentially farmers and weavers. If you think that's somehow a distortion of the Church of Ireland Parish Register, in fact, if you go to Moyallen, which would be the nearest school where they all went to school, and take the occupations out of the school registers for valid occupations for 1861 to 73, we used 5, you will see exactly the same pattern. In fact, the pattern is even more marked than that because this carpenter that looks quite large, that's the Friars family, who was, where there was one carpenter, but he was extremely prolific in children. So that distorts your figures, all right? So, but that labourer's figure, you know, if there weren't so many children, it would actually look much lower. But the point I'm simply making to you is that this farm looks as though this is a landscape of farms. It's not. It's a landscape of weavers. And it is, in fact, 2 different sorts of society. And this, I think, helps us to understand a little bit of why Oliver wanted into land. Because one thing which is very striking, if you look at how Oliver described himself, and then how Joseph, his son, describes himself in registers and all the rest of it. Oliver will describe himself as a weaver on his son's marriage certificate, but as soon as he gets the farm, he begins to describe himself as a farmer. Yeah? And he will only use the term weaver once more, and that is in the middle of the 1870s. And the significance of that we'll see, of that date, we'll see in a moment or two. But by acquiring this land, he had moved from being part of one social group to part of another social group. Now, I'll return to that point just in a minute or two. One of the things about the, if you're asking where did they make their money, how did they get their money, why was weaving so important, one of the ways we can try and trace what's going on, I mean how much they're making of land, how much land money they're making of weaving, is by looking at how they pay their rents, whether they're able to pay their rents or they're not able to pay their rents. And what appears from this is a fairly clear picture. The blue line at the top is simply what the rental of the estate should be. Right? If you top out the total rents. And you will see that what had happened in the 1830s, the rents had gone up quite significantly, and then they have plateaued for a very long period of time. In other words, going back to the point that I made before, that leases fix rents, they give you stability. Okay? And then suddenly there's a collapse here, and that collapse here is the result of fair rent reviews coming in. So that when the 1870 Land Act comes in, or the 1880 Land Act rather, then people begin to appeal rents to the Land Estates Commissioners. They start to use Griffith's valuation, so you start to see just how much the farms were overvalued, if you like, or how much extra rent they were paying that they weren't getting back. Okay? So that's what you might expect. Okay? The red line, right, that's what they should be getting in. The red line shows you the arrears. Right? So you can see the points of crisis, right, in family, in the economy of Knocknamuckly. And very obviously, there it is there, the famine and its immediate aftermath. I said not much starvation, but a lot of disruption. A lot of disruption coming principally, from typhus. People arriving on carts in Lurgan, the workhouse, and so on. So that's one. The second peak then is in the 1870s, in the 1860s, and the third peak then is in the 1880s, and that seems to be just at the point when the estate is beginning to be unwound. You can see there's a correlation between arrears going up there Then the link there with rents being brought down. So really what we need to think about are bad years in the 1840s, bad years in the 1860s, and bad years in the 1880s. That gives us some sense of where they got their money from, about how they survived. Now, this is the, how can we tie that up with what we might, with the population of the townland? Well, if you simply take the figures out of the census and you start looking at this, you will see that in fact there is a very strong and interesting correlation. You will see that in the 1860s, the population, the number of houses go down. Obviously the famine, it goes down. The 1860s, it goes down. And then in the 1880s, 1890s, and so on, fairly steadily going down one way or another. This is not just a feature of Carrickbrack. This is also not just a feature of Knocknamuckly, it's also a feature of the whole DED. So it's not just something affecting the townland, it's affecting the whole area. These arrears are tied to that question. And if we go back to the farm, and look at what happens in the farm over those years, in fact, as that crisis of the 1880s begins to hit, so you begin to see population falling, you begin to see what had been up to that point a fairly cohesive world, okay? Because Oliver's eldest son, Joseph, marries Martha and acquires the farm, but all these children are all living either in Knocknamuckly or in Ballygarden. That is the townland beside it. And this Oliver here will create a whole family, a whole dynasty in Ballygarden. Okay? So they all stay locally. That generation stays locally. And we presume that Oliver also lived locally. Otherwise, how did the father know, how did the agent know to hire him in the first place if he wasn't known locally? So this is a society with considerable stability. Right? And that figures with some of the other things that we see. But look at what happens in this generation. George, when Joseph dies, George gets the farm, he sells it, and he moves to Belfast. Right? Henry goes to New Zealand. First of all, he goes to Belfast. The first thing that happens. And he works, I think, as a crane man, I think in the shipyard. His wife dies, and Henry then goes off to New Zealand, leaving behind him a number of children who are on the farm in Knocknamuckly in 1911 census. But Henry goes off and remarries in Australia. Rachel, who is trained as the weaver, Rachel moves to Portadown. Oliver dies early. Marianne marries locally and sets up as a farmer, and Joseph dies young as well. In other words, the whole family fragments. Farm passes out of the family's hands, the whole and collapses. So that what you're seeing is a very, very considerable disruption in that horizon there, in that generation there. On the farm, not only on the farm, but in the townland, and not only in the townland, but in Carrickbrack. Those of you who like to see these things visually, to see if there are reasons for these things. Why is this happening? Well, if you look, those are the baptism figures, those are the burial figures, those are the marriage figures, never mind those. In other words, the baptisms in the parish are way outstripping the burials. That is, this population should be growing dramatically, because there are more people coming in than there are going out. Okay? I mean, if you look at don't worry about this last figure, that's only because of partial register. But, you know, there's an enormous gap. But yet, by that stage, as we've seen, the population is falling. Families are fragmented. What is happening? Well, what is happening is that this isn't famine, this isn't disease, this isn't anything else. This is out-migration. This is people leaving in quite significant numbers. And it's very clear from this link, this difference between baptisms and burials. Now, let me just look at that in another way. And that is, if this weaver's world that we've talked about, and it's essentially this weaver's world which is fragmenting, which is collapsing, leaving behind it a small farm world which is under stress and which is taking longer to collapse, but nevertheless by the end of the First World War is under very considerable pressure. It is the weaver's world which takes the first pressure and then is followed up. Now, why is the weaver's world collapsing? Well, the weaver's world is collapsing partly because of industrialization. We know already, if you look at the taking of the covenant on the PRONI website, if you look at the names of the people from this townland who take the covenant, many of them take it not in Knocknamuckly, but in Portadown. And you can tie those names up with the 1911 census, 1901 census to a lesser extent, which points out that they may be living in Knocknamuckly, but they're working in power weaving operations in Portadown. So the rise of industrialization is putting increasing pressure, although this is the beginning of the 20th century. Someone would have thought these guys should have gone years ago, but only from the 1880s are they really beginning to be put under some sort of pressure. Second element is that mobility is increased by the fact that these people are increasingly well educated. Because we can trace these people being educated in Moyallen School. Now, let's not get carried away with ourselves here. I mean, if we consider in 1875 and 1876, Rachel, for example, one of the daughters, one of George's sisters, George and Rachel and Henry are all in Moyallen School. Henry manages to make 10 days out of 55 in attendances. Rachel manages to make 10 days as well. Henry, the genius of the family, makes 15 days out of 55 in terms of attendance before he is taken away to become a weaver. So that so these people are acquiring some level of education. They are clearly not becoming intellectuals overnight, but they're acquiring some level of education, which is helping them and allowing them to be able to move around. That's very clear on the 1901 and 1911 census, where you know almost everyone in the townland can read or write. Now, by now, I hope some sort of picture of this townland. A townland increasingly under stress, a farm under stress, a generation beginning to fragment, not just in the townland, so these are the pressures, if you like, which are pushing this world apart. What are the things that are holding it together? What are the things making for cohesion within this townland? Well, now, I mean, some people, one thing which is fairly clear from the 1901 and the 1911 census is that one thing which holds these people together, strangely enough, is religion. That it is very largely and very dominantly a Protestant settlement. Now, that so much is uncontentious. And if you look at the figures, in fact, of what happens, you see these figures here, of between 1901 and 1911. This is taken from the census. 99 Church of Ireland, 22 Roman Catholics, 16 Presbyterian, 6 Methodists. Really dominantly Church of Ireland, without any doubt at all. And you can look at that figure, I mean, again, within the whole of the whole of Seagull Parish, the whole of Carabra. Okay? And you'll see that not only are Catholics in a minority to start with, but they're becoming an even smaller minority as time goes on. These are the weavers, Catholic weavers being put under increased pressure, the lower end of the social spectrum. Okay? So that, therefore, religion, cohesion, Protestant Church of Ireland should hold things together. And indeed, there is some evidence that that is the case. And that's not an unusual observation. But let's ask ourselves, what do we mean by Church of Ireland? This might become a more complicated story now. Oliver was Church of Ireland. His son, Joseph, was Church of Ireland. His wife, however, was Presbyterian. If you look at their children at Moyan School, George, in 1 year, was Church of Ireland. In the following year, he was Presbyterian. Henry is down as a Presbyterian. His sister, then aged 7.5, is down as Church of Ireland. In other words, this business of confessional belief is not quite, all that it seems. There is a lot of confession switching, shall we say. And exactly what this means starts to become very difficult. It becomes even more complicated. Because here is a townland which is largely Protestant, largely Church of Ireland. You would expect from the sort of figures which are usually bandied about that the way in which people responded with the Covenant in 1912, 13. Anyway, in 1913, they would respond in this way by rallying round to Protestant Ireland. Well, here's the problem. There are a potential 86 people over 18, males over 18, in the townland who can take the Covenant. Only 48 do so, and a number of those are Catholics. Now, what does this tell us about religion as a binding force? Let's just go back for a moment or two. George, loyal son of the Church of Ireland, does not take the Covenant. His wife, Methodist, signs the Woman's Declaration. What's going on here? What's the story behind this family? Is George a traitor? George is a fully paid up member of LOL 107, the Ballygargan True Blues. Well, that's to say, he is a fully signed up member in 1913. It doesn't last very long. By 1915, he's resigned. Why does George not take the Covenant, while his wife does? Well, part of the explanation seems to be the Church of Ireland minister. Because the Covenant was organised in the parish by the Church of Ireland minister in the churchyard of the church that we saw. But George, it seems, although he is baptised Church of Ireland, and his children are also largely, if occasionally, baptised Church of Ireland, he seems at this stage, or he is in 1911, a Presbyterian. He refuses to have anything to do with the Church of Ireland. His wife is a Methodist. and therefore is an awful lot happier dealing with the Church of Ireland than he was. In other words, divisions within Protestant Ireland, the Covenant, are far more complicated than we can ever begin to think about. And when you start to look at how an individual family and how an individual townland, because this pattern is repeated time and time again across the townland of a husband and wife going in very different ways over the Covenant. This pattern is tied clearly to factors other than simply just Protestant or Catholic, and should give us an idea of a much more nuanced view. It's also, I think, quite significant that George was a very milk and water Orangeman, but was, as far as I can see, a much more enthusiastic Freemason, as indeed were all his friends in the townland, including the postman, who was the executor to his will, a man called Samuel Porter. And it may well be that we have talked a great deal about the Orange Order while ignoring one of the even more important bonding forces, that is Freemasonry. Now, I've tried to give you some picture of a local farm and its setting in one townland in the late 19th century. And what I've tried to do is to give you some insight, I hope, into the potential of what you can do, because this sort of research is done really without vast quantities of archives, but by piecing together patiently lots of little bits of information and building up the stories of families in particular places over time, the troubles, the difficulties and the triumphs which they have, and how they find their own salvation in very peculiar worlds of the past. And those peculiar worlds are the real stories of local history. Thank you very much. They only weave very occasionally. So they only weave when they need an extra bit of money. There are some people who have to survive on that and nothing else, but a lot of them just weave when they get a bit of money. So what they do is they have a dealing with a guy in Guildford or a guy in Portadown or what have you. And he basically commissions them to weave, whatever it is. Now, they will then do it and they'll bring it to him, he will buy it off and he will then sell it in London. So it's that sort of relationship that they have.
But what's their standard rate?
No, I mean, everything, well, we know there's a Royal Commission on Handloom Weavers, and there isn't a standard rate. Everything is negotiated. So that you want linen damask done, he says, I'll provide you with, the yarn, and I'll pay you X. Now, next week it might be Y, and the week after it might be Z, and the week after it might be. So everything depends on demand and supply. So it's a real, it's a real bargaining chart. So if you're a weaver and you have nothing, well, you're at the victim of you're at the mercy of these people. If you have a farm and you do this occasionally, like when things go bad in the 1860s, I mean, that's the one time that I mentioned that Joseph says to them, he calls himself a weaver again. Otherwise, he always called himself a farmer. But in bad times, he'd call himself a weaver, because that's what you need to get yourself over. But that the weavers are clearly, I mean, very interesting. I didn't get into this, but if you look at illegitimacies, and you can look at illegitimacies in Knocknamuckly, because the rector very helpfully wrote across the entry for baptism illegitimate, if they were illegitimate. And weavers have a much, much higher rate of illegitimacy than farmers. Much higher. Farmers by 5%. That's about the European norm for the time. Weavers are something like 15%. So it's a much more flexible society. It's a much less control zone with a lot of people moving around. So it's a very different sort of world to the world of the farmers, to the respectable world of the farmers.
I'm sorry I'm coming back on you again.
No.
But there is a man called Joseph Malcolmson,
yes,
from Bustow.
Yes.
And he seems to break the norm. He seems
Yes.
to be held very highly.
Yes, he's a Quaker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why. I mean, you know, the Quakers got into this business very, you know, early. But by the 19th century, some of them, I mean, they are the honourable guys. I mean, they're the guys who, you know, have very powerful ethics behind it. And the Malcolmsons then, they move into Lurgan, isn't that right?
Yeah.
And they have a big weaving operation. And
I don't know that.
I
He
think-
did the Bluestone.
yes, I mean, I think I think they move into Lurgan, and they have a big weaving operation in Lurgan. And I think they probably become Methodists later on. But certainly at that point, they're and the other place where the Malcolmsons become very important is Port Law in Waterford, where they have a massive operation. You know, and the massive operation down there is like Sand Mills. It's like a factory village. Everything is looked after for people. It's like Cadbury, you know, in England. You know, and I mean that's what the Malcolmsons are like. It really was very paternalistic, and a lot of it comes from this religious ethos. Now they're the better sort of guys, and there are a lot of Quakers involved all along the Bann Valley in some of the really big weaving mills. And if you're dealing with them, you are dealing with, you know, very straightforward people. But there are others which are less straightforward, shall we say. You know?
Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
Is there any connection with the family connection with the Ballygarden Gillespies? The reason I ask is I'm a Ballygarden Gillespie.
Oh yeah.
I found Oliver's great grandson living with some of my family in East Belfast. I've never been able to link them as to why he was there.
Well, I can tell you. I mean,
Robert Henry.
Yes, that's Robert Henry there.
Yeah.
And that's Oliver there. Okay. And Oliver then is what? My father's cousin. Oliver is buried in Ballygarden.
Oh, right, okay.
And he is the executor, one of the two executors, the other one being postman, one of the two executors of my grandfather's will. But he's buried in Ballygarden. The grave is you have great difficulty finding the grave because once this side disappears, and it seems that this side disappears shortly after, Oliver dies in Portadown, I think, in the hospital about 1940, something or other, would I be right there? 43, I think. Oliver dies, and that's the end of the family. They're gone from there. So the grave is there, and there is a marker, but it's very difficult to read.
Thank you very much for a very informative talk. Just as you are the grandson of George, as we were talking about, I'm the granddaughter of John Alfred Brownlee. A lot of Brownlees are buried in Knocknamuckly church grounds.
Yes.
He had a farm at Bluestone, so there's Bluestone there, and also was master of the local school at that time.
All right. Okay.
I wonder, is there anybody here who might be related to me as I am trying to get closer to my family tree? Do you mind me asking?
No,
that?
certainly not.
Anybody related to Brownlee, John Alfred, Bluestone?
Was he the schoolmaster?
Yes.
No, he's not related to me, but
Okay.
my parents went to school.
The thing about
Tell you
this,
stories about him, about what they used to do to him.
why this is interesting, you see, is that if you can take a townland, or even half a townland, I mean, Knocknamuckly is very good because the estate is very small, so it's very easy to get a handle very quickly on who the families are, and who's connected to who, and who's linking backwards and forwards. You can do that very quickly, and once you can build up profiles of those families, you can start to begin to understand how the place is actually working, who's living beside who, who's related to who, what are their network. Important things, for example, like who are executors to wills. They're not necessarily blood relations, but these are the contacts that you have. I mean, and it shows you the sort of world in which you're moving. And that's what's really really interesting. That gives you a better sense of what that world was like, I think, rather than anything else. But it's that working from the individual family or the individual farm upwards, you know, which is good.
Could I ask, the initial information about the sale of the farm, or the buying of the farm,
Yes.
did you get that through the family? Or?
No. I mean, all I knew when I started this really is all I knew, was that my father was from somewhere outside Portadown. That's it, much as I knew. And so everything else comes from documents. So the acquisition of the farm, for example, there are a series of about 5 rentals here for the estate. And as time would go on, if someone died or someone went bust, because Oliver got the farm when a guy went broke. And what they did was they crossed the name out, they wrote the new name in, and how much he paid. And then, you know, when he died, like when Oliver dies, it's his wife who takes, interestingly, it's his wife, not his son who takes it over, it's Rose who takes it over. So they changed the name. So essentially that sort of information comes from the rentals. And then later on, once you get into the valuation records are great for this sort of thing.
But I can't go any far enough back.
No, as far back as anybody can go, you know, seems to be around the family. So things start to run out very dramatically before the family. And then you have to start to get really lucky. You know, and really lucky means you have to hit on a good estate collection with, you know, rentals, where you will actually be able to find somebody. So persevere is the only thing I can suggest. But you know, it's fairly straightforward. I mean, the sort of stuff I'm doing is very straightforward. You know, because you simply, there are the census and the valuation will allow you to go a long way back. Will allow you back to the 1850s anyway.
I know people who live in these 2 farms now, but he doesn't have the deeds that go way back.
Right. Well, I mean, either the deeds, either they still have them, or they're destroyed, or they're with the landlord, with the landlord's papers. You know, so that's the landlord. Or the third possibility, there are 2 other possibilities. One other possibility is the Land Commission. I mean, when the Land Commission in the 19th century bought estates, they took evidence of title. And that stuff is with the Land Commission stuff here.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's essentially,
It's very
there aren't
very,
deeds for most
yeah,
places.
it's very, sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. You just don't know. What the Land Commission went in, you see, and they said, right, we're acquiring this estate. And they lifted everything that they thought was relevant for evidence of title. That's what they were really, they're interested in conveyancing. They're interested in evidence of title. So if it doesn't convey any evidence of title, bit or shred it. Sometimes you just put that on the box and put it away. You know, sometimes you're lucky, but it is lucky. So, you know, I mean, that's so you won't get the old days. You're more likely to get the valuation stuff, because like, how far back can you go?
Well, to the valuation rate from Griffiths.
Okay, well then, yeah, so you've got from Griffiths on. You may be able to go back earlier. I mean, have you tried the first valuation, and in particular the title plotting books for the 1820s?
No,
Try those.
I can help you.
Yeah, there are things called the title plotting books. They're made about in the late 1820s, early 1830s, when tithes are abolished and they compound, and they take the amount of tithe and spread it, but they make lists of tenants. So go to the townland that you know where someone has an 1850, look at the same townland in the title plotting books for the 1820s, see do they turn up there.
thank you.
I was researching a family home near Tullylish,
Yes,
Kernan,
yes.
and I got the names in a registration, I think it was 1813,
Yes.
and it gave the size of the acres.
I mean, there are a whole set of very random I mean, you know, sometimes you'll get a survey. Sometimes, for example, I remember a guy coming up to me once and saying, you know, have you ever seen this? And he opened up produced a camera, started to show me this thing, which was the vestry books for a parish in Meath, Church of Ireland parish in Meath. And lo and behold, there were surveys for about 800 of every farm in the parish, with tenants' names, sub-tenants' names. Now that had been done by the rector who wanted to collect the tithes. So, I mean, that was just one-off, unique for that parish. Sometimes you get that. You never know. You hit on that sort of stuff. That's why it's always worth looking at Church of Ireland records, you know, as well, looking at the vestry books, the parish that people are living in, because they're a mix and gathering of all sorts of stuff.
And they could be providing for poor Catholics. Poor
Absolutely. I mean, remember that until 1870, no, in fact, technically legally, strictly legally, until about 5 years ago, I think, the last
5 years ago?
about 5 years ago, which was the Statute Law Revision Act. Everybody was technically a member of the Church of Ireland because they did not repeal the Act of Uniformity.
I got you.
At the 1870s. So if you didn't turn up for church on Sunday, you were allowed for a fee of 5 pence up until 5 years ago. Now, however, the practicality is that legally, up until 1870, up until this establishment, everybody is a member of the Church of Ireland. Doesn't matter where you go on a Sunday morning, doesn't matter what confession you are a member of the Church of Ireland. You are therefore liable for all the church taxes, i.e. tithes. You are also eligible for all the parish benefits. That's why Catholics are buried in the Church of Ireland graveyard, because they're members of the parish. And they're entitled to be buried in the Church of Ireland graveyard. That's why you have no Catholic graveyards until, the 1840s, the 1820s. Yeah, I mean, they were called in 1829. So you don't, I mean, so you have Golden Bridge, you have
Dean's Grange.
Dean's Grange, you have in Dublin, and in the north it's even later. But everybody, the only thing that will keep you out of a graveyard is that you're not a member of the parish. So that you go to, you look at the gravestone inscriptions, for example, for Shankill, graveyard for Belfast. See, it's full of Presbyterians, full of them. And why? Because that was the very large proportion of the population who were all buried, seemingly, in the old Shankill graveyard on what is now, of course, the Shankill Road. But you look at the gravestone inscription, and there are all the families. They're all Presbyterian families. You will not find them in the Church of Ireland registers under baptisms or under marriages, but you find them registered under burials, because they're being buried in the parish.
And if you were poor, you could also go to the vestry.
And if you're poor,
they'll help you.
Again, the vestry, I mean, the Church of Ireland, before 1830, is responsible for poor relief in Ireland, for everybody. So that, therefore, if you look at vestry records, you will get lists of the poor in the parish. No confessional basis. In fact, it seems in Ireland, they worried less about confession than they seem to have done in England, where you get all sorts of quibbles, about if you don't turn up in church on Sunday morning, you won't get your money. But I've never seen that in Ireland.